In August 1945, Japan had almost nothing left. 2 cities had been erased from the map. In a matter of seconds, 100 others had been firebombed. 100 others had been firebombed into ash. The Navy was at the bottom of the Pacific. The Army was gone. The Empire, the one that had terrorized half of Asia for a decade, had surrendered on the deck of an American battleship in Tokyo Bay. The country was starving. Literally, people were eating bark, scrounging through rubble for scraps.
And here is the part that nobody talks about when they tell this story. 30 years later, Japan was the second largest economy on Earth. Not recovering, not rebuilding, second largest in the world. No oil, no rare earth minerals, no vast agricultural land. A country the size of California, with a mountain range running straight through the middle of it. So, how do you go from total ruin to economic superpower in one generation? The answer is not what you learned in school, and it says something deeply uncomfortable about how wealth actually works. Before we get into the mechanics, let's be honest about why this matters right now. We live in a moment where people are constantly debating which countries will rise, which will fall, what causes prosperity, and what causes collapse. And Japan's story keeps getting cited, usually badly, to prove whatever point someone already wanted to make. The free market crowd says Japan proves that deregulation works. The industrial policy crowd says it proves that government planning works. The globalists say it proves trade works. The nationalists say it proves national identity works. They're all using the same story. They can't all be right. The truth is messier and considerably more interesting. Because Japan's rise wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a miracle. It was a deliberate, sometimes brutal, occasionally absurd engineering project, carried out by a tiny group of bureaucrats, protected by an occupying foreign army, and financed in ways that would make modern economists deeply uncomfortable. Let's go back to the rubble. When General Douglas MacArthur landed in Japan in August 1945, he had a problem. He was in charge of a country of 72 million people who were, depending on your perspective, either defeated enemies or potential future allies in a Cold War that was already beginning to take shape. The Soviet Union had just declared war on Japan in the final days of the conflict and was eyeing the northern islands like a man at a buffet. MacArthur had to stabilize Japan, fast. And the way he did it, the way America did it, was by doing something that sounds counterintuitive given everything that came after. They didn't install laissez-faire capitalism. They didn't free the market and step back. They wrote Japan a new constitution, purged the old military leadership, broke up the massive industrial conglomerates, the zaibatsu, that had financed the war machine, redistributed agricultural land from landlords to peasants, established labor unions. This is the part American history textbooks get a little quiet about. The post-war Japanese economic miracle was, at its foundation, built on a set of reforms that looked a lot like the New Deal. Land redistribution, unionization, busting up monopolies, investing in universal education. Now, none of this was purely altruistic. The Americans needed Japan stable and productive because by 1950, they were fighting a war in Korea and they needed a nearby industrial base to supply it. Japan essentially became the assembly plant for the Korean War. And that contract, American security guarantee in exchange for Japanese economic integration into the Western sphere, is the invisible scaffolding underneath the entire miracle. Japan didn't have to spend money on a military. The US did that. Article 9 of the new Japanese Constitution prohibited offensive war. Japan capped defense spending, eventually, at around 1% of GDP. 1%. Meanwhile, the United States was spending 6, 7, 8% on defense throughout the Cold War. Japan took that freed capital and pointed it somewhere else entirely. Here is where the story gets genuinely strange. In 1949, a man named Hayato Ikeda, then a low-level finance official, later prime minister, flew to Washington and met with a Detroit banker named Joseph Dodge. Dodge had a theory. He called it the Dodge Line. The idea was to stabilize Japan's currency, eliminate the hyperinflation that was eating people's savings, and put Japan on a fixed exchange rate with the dollar. The rate they chose, 360 yen to $1. That number, 360 is not magic, but it turned out to be, for Japan, something close to it. At 360 yen to the dollar, Japanese goods were cheap, very cheap, artificially cheap in the eyes of some. A Toyota that cost the equivalent of $800 to produce could be sold in America for a profit while still undercutting Detroit. And here's what Japan did with that edge. The Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, was essentially given control over which industries got capital, which got protected from foreign competition, and which got pushed into export markets. This was not a free market. This was something more like a managed race.
MIT, I would pick a sector. Steel, then shipbuilding, then consumer electronics, then automobiles. Flood it with low-interest loans from state-directed banks, protect it from imports while it was growing, and then once it was competitive, unleash it onto global markets. The world called it the Japanese economic miracle. The Japanese called it more plainly industrial policy. By 1960, Ikeda, now Prime Minister, announced his income-doubling plan. He promised Japanese citizens that their standard of living would double within a decade. It actually doubled in 7 years. Not promised, not projected, delivered. GDP growth of 10% per year, year after year for nearly 2 decades. Numbers that, if you saw them in a spreadsheet today, you would assume were a typo. Now here's the part nobody puts in the textbooks. None of this worked without one deeply uncomfortable ingredient: repressed consumption. Japanese workers were extraordinarily productive. They worked long hours, they built world-class products, and they saved, obsessively, culturally, almost religiously, at rates that made Western economists nervous.
In the 1970s, the average Japanese household saved around 20% of its income. 20%. The American rate at the same time was around 8%. That savings didn't sit in mattresses. It flowed into the postal savings system, Japan Post, which was the largest financial institution in the world by deposits. And that money got channeled through the government's fiscal investment and loan program, which the Japanese called the second budget, directly into infrastructure, industry, and export capacity. The Japanese worker was, in a very real sense, financing the Japanese miracle with his own deferred pleasure. He got a smaller apartment than an American worker, a smaller car, a smaller life, in material terms, for a generation. And the economy boomed. This is the quiet irony at the heart of the miracle. Japan's great capitalist success story was partially funded by what amounted to a vast national savings collective, directed by bureaucrats, in service of a long-term national project. The West looked at the results: Sony, Toyota, Mitsubishi, the gleaming new Shinkansen, and called it the triumph of the free market. The mechanism underneath was something considerably more complicated. By the late 1980s, Japan had gone past miracle into something that started to look like delirium. Real estate in Tokyo became so expensive that, on paper, the land under the Imperial Palace was worth more than the entire state of California. That's not a metaphor, that was a real estimate, published seriously, in 1989. The Nikkei stock index hit 38,915 on the last trading day of 1989. Japanese banks were buying golf courses in Hawaii and skyscrapers in Manhattan. A Japanese company bought Rockefeller Center, another bought Columbia Pictures. And then, in January 1990, it started to unravel. The Bank of Japan raised interest rates to cool the speculation. The stock market fell, then fell more, then kept falling for the better part of a decade. The land under the Imperial Palace was not, it turned out, worth more than California. What followed is called Japan's lost decade. Except it lasted closer to 2. And here is what makes the crash so instructive and so disturbing. The same mechanisms that built the miracle amplified the collapse. State-directed banks had made loans on assets that turned out to be worthless. The culture of consensus and loyalty that had made Japanese corporations so disciplined meant nobody admitted failure until it was catastrophic. The very savings rate that had funded growth was now a trap. Consumers too cautious to spend. Companies too indebted to invest. The strengths became the weaknesses. The features became the bugs. Japan is still extraordinarily wealthy. Don't mistake the lost decades for a collapse. The infrastructure still works. The companies still build things. The life expectancy is among the highest in the world. But the second largest economy status, that's China now. And China studied Japan closely, very closely. The state-directed banks, the industrial policy, the export-led growth, the fixed exchange rate that made goods artificially cheap, the repressed consumption. China read the Japan playbook, and in some ways ran it harder than Japan ever did. Which raises a question that economists are genuinely divided on. If the miracle was real, and it was, but the mechanism required deferred consumption, state-directed capital, and a geopolitical patron willing to provide security while you industrialized, then what does that actually tell us about how wealth gets built? Is there a version of this story that ends well, where the workers who built the miracle get to enjoy it before the bubble forms? Japan is still trying to answer that question. It's been 80 years. And honestly,